Do you think he's altered his appearance at all?
Again, I don't know.
Have you sighted him at all anywhere? Have there been any reliable reports?
No.
On the night of November 7, 1974, Britain's upper-class society was rocked by a shocking crime that would haunt the country for decades. At 46 Lower Belgrave Street, a wealthy London townhouse in Belgravia, Sandra Rivet, a devoted nanny in her late 20s, went into the basement kitchen to make a simple cup of tea. She could never have known that this ordinary act would lead her straight into the path of violence. As she entered, an attacker waited in the shadows with a heavy lead pipe wrapped in plaster. The strikes came quickly and with frightening force. Sandra fell, badly injured, unable to defend herself. The attack was deliberate, suggesting planning rather than random violence. Upstairs, Lady Veronica Lucan returned home unaware of the horror unfolding below. She was soon attacked as well, receiving serious head injuries. Dazed and bleeding, she somehow managed to escape, running into the London night and screaming for help. Her cries alerted neighbors, and within hours, police were investigating. Their focus turned almost immediately to Lord Richard John Bingham, the 7th Earl of Lucan. He was Sandra's employer, Veronica's estranged husband, and a man known for both his charm and his dangerous temper. When detectives arrived to question Lord Lucan, they found that he had disappeared completely. In the hours after the murder and attack, Lucan had fled, leaving behind chaos and suspicion. His sudden disappearance fueled one of the most dramatic manhunts in modern British history. Police checked ports, airports, and train stations, hoping to catch him before he could escape the country. Rumors began to spread. Sightings were reported in Hong Kong, Australia, South Africa, even small towns in the English countryside. Some believed he was hiding with rich friends who were protecting him. Others claimed he had killed himself in shame, perhaps by jumping into the English Channel. For years, newspapers followed every possible lead, but nothing solid ever came. The mystery deepened, and Lucan became almost mythical. A ghost story whispered about in pubs and printed in headlines around the world. By 1999, the courts officially declared him dead, passing his title and estate to his son George. But in truth, no one really knew what had happened to him, and questions about his guilt, his fate, and the murder itself never went away. On the night of November 7, 1974, London's wealthy district of Belgravia became the center of one of the most shocking crimes in modern British history. Inside 46 Lower Belgrave Street, Sandra Rivet, a young nurse and nanny devoted to the Lucan children, went downstairs to the kitchen to prepare a cup of tea. It was a simple, everyday act that turned into her last moments. Waiting in the dim basement was a man with a lead pipe wrapped in plaster to make it heavier and stronger. The attack was quick and brutal. Sandra was struck repeatedly, leaving her fatally injured before she even had a chance to defend herself. This was no random act of violence. It was deliberate, personal, and filled with intent. Moments later, Lady Veronica Lucan, the wife of Richard John Bingham, 7th Earl of Lucan, came home. She walked straight into the horror unfolding in her house. She too was attacked with the same weapon, left bleeding and dazed. But Veronica managed something extraordinary. Despite her injuries and shock, she broke free, ran into the cold November night, and screamed for help. Her cries alerted neighbors, who called police. Very quickly, detectives pieced together what had happened. Their suspicion fell directly on Lord Lucan himself. A charming but troubled aristocrat, Lucan had financial problems, a broken marriage, and a reputation for violence hidden beneath his polished public image. What seemed like a shocking crime was only the beginning of one of the longest mysteries in British history. As detectives moved to question Lord Lucan, they discovered he was gone. He had disappeared just hours after the murder, leaving behind unanswered questions and a trail of confusion. This was no ordinary disappearance. Lucan was not just any man. He was a member of Britain's elite, a gambler known at exclusive clubs, and someone with friends in high places. His vanishing immediately launched one of the most frantic manhunts ever seen. Police searched ports, airports, and train stations, fearing he might slip out of the country. Reports came flooding in from across the globe. Some claimed to see him in Australia, others in South Africa, even in Hong Kong. The stories varied. Some said he lived quietly under a new name, while others suggested he had drowned himself in the English Channel the night of the murder. For years, newspapers covered every possible lead. Some sightings seemed believable. Others were pure rumor. Still, no hard evidence ever surfaced. As time passed, the mystery grew, and Lucan's name became legendary. He was no longer just a missing man, but a symbol of privilege, power, and escape. Finally, in 1999, after 25 years of silence, the courts declared him legally dead. His estate and noble title were handed to his son, George Bingham. But even then, the story was far from over. Many still believed Lucan had managed to live on in hiding, protected by a network of allies who shielded him from justice. To understand why police believed Lord Lucan could commit such a crime, we need to look inside his household. Behind the glamour of aristocratic life, things were far from perfect. Lady Veronica Lucan later described her marriage as deeply troubled. Richard John Bingham was elegant and charming in public, but at home, he was often unpredictable, controlling, and frightening. His obsession with gambling only made things worse. At exclusive clubs like the Claremont, he spent huge sums of money on high-stakes games like Baccarat. To outsiders, it looked like a glamorous lifestyle. But in reality, Lucan was drowning in debt. The family's wealth and reputation were slipping away, hidden behind a facade of luxury. There were also darker elements in the household. Lady Lucan described years of psychological pressure and occasional physical threats. His mood could swing from charm to aggression without warning, leaving her and the children on edge. Sandra Rivet, the nanny, was one of the few stable and positive influences in the home. She cared deeply for the children, offering them security in a tense environment. But this also placed her in danger. When Lucan's anger and frustration reached breaking point, Sandra became the innocent victim of a plan that had likely been aimed at Veronica. The murder weapon itself showed careful thought. A lead pipe wrapped in plaster to prevent splinters and ensure maximum damage. This was not the tool of an unplanned outburst, but of someone who prepared carefully. For investigators, it painted a picture of a man who had reached a dangerous level of calculation and violence. By 1974, the Lucan marriage had collapsed completely. The couple was locked in bitter custody battles over their 3 children. Lady Lucan had been granted custody after presenting evidence of her husband's unstable behavior and gambling addiction. For Lord Lucan, this was more than just a legal defeat, it was a humiliation. Raised in wealth and privilege, he was used to control and authority. Losing custody of his children cut deeply into his pride and status. He fought the ruling relentlessly, painting Lady Lucan as unstable and unfit. But the courts did not believe him. Friends later recalled that Veronica had felt increasingly unsafe in those months. She said she was followed, her phone lines disturbed, and her movements monitored. Police would later conclude that Lucan had indeed been stalking her, studying her habits, and preparing for a violent confrontation. His motive became chillingly clear. If Veronica was removed from the picture, Lucan could reclaim his children and his sense of control. But the plan went terribly wrong. Sandra, the nanny, came to the house that evening unexpectedly. In the basement kitchen, Lucan likely mistook her for Veronica in the dim light. By the time he realized his error, Sandra was already fatally injured. When Veronica herself came home, she too was attacked. But unlike Sandra, she survived. Terrified and wounded, she escaped into the night, exposing Lucan's crime. In that moment, any chance he had of regaining his children was gone forever. Instead, he became a fugitive from justice. Lord Lucan's disappearance soon turned into one of Britain's greatest mysteries. The public followed the case closely, fascinated by the idea of a nobleman-turned-murderer. For years, sightings were reported from all over the world. Some claimed he was living quietly under new identities. Others believed he had powerful friends protecting him. Each new tip reignited media attention, and amateur detectives pored over every detail. Some theories suggested Lucan drowned himself in guilt, perhaps jumping from a ferry into the English Channel. Others believed he was silenced by criminal gangs he owed money to. But nothing was ever proven. The case became a mixture of fact, rumor, and legend. For Sandra Rivet's family, this lack of closure was especially painful. They believed justice had been denied. While they lived with the grief of losing her, the man they held responsible seemed to have escaped completely. As time passed, Lucan became more myth than man. He was portrayed in books, documentaries, and even films, always as the mysterious aristocrat who had somehow outsmarted the law. Even when the courts declared him dead in 1999, many were unconvinced. Too many stories, too many sightings, and too many unanswered questions kept the mystery alive. For 50 years, the Lucan case seemed destined to remain unsolved. But in early 2025, everything changed. Sandra Rivet's son, Neil Barman, revealed that new forensic techniques had been applied to evidence preserved from the 1970s. Investigators re-examined fingerprints and biological samples using advanced DNA, technology that did not exist decades ago. To many people's surprise, DNA can now be extracted even from fingerprints, and that was the key. The results were shocking. They suggested that Lord Lucan had not died in 1974 but had lived on for years afterward. This revelation overturned decades of assumptions. Forensic science had finally provided proof that Lucan had escaped justice and managed to survive long after most believed he was dead. For Sandra's family, the discovery was bittersweet. On one hand, it confirmed what they had always believed: Lucan was the killer. On the other, it meant he had lived freely while Sandra's life had been cut short. For the public, the news was explosive. Theories of suicide or mafia-style killings now looked weak. Instead, a darker truth emerged. Lucan had likely been helped. His privilege and connections may have shielded him, allowing him to live in hiding for decades. The revelation set off a storm across Britain. Television programs, newspapers, and online debates filled with questions. If Lucan had indeed lived on, where had he been hiding? How could a man so famous slip away unnoticed? And more importantly, who had helped him? Legal experts argued about whether it would even be possible to put him on trial if he was still alive in his 90s. Some said yes, justice should always be served, no matter the age of the criminal. Others wondered if pursuing him at such an old age would achieve anything. But for many, the issue was less about punishment and more about accountability. Lucan's disappearance was not just a crime story. It had become a symbol of how privilege can distort justice. Ordinary people believed that if he had been a common man, he would never have escaped capture. For Sandra Rivett's family, the DNA evidence was both confirmation and fresh heartbreak. They now knew Lucan had mocked justice, living out his life while they carried their loss. Neil Barman, who had only learned later in life that Sandra was his mother, vowed to keep fighting for answers. His words were filled with both anger and determination. "I remain committed to exploring every avenue to bring closure and justice to my mother's memory." The Lucan mystery was no longer just about one man's fate. It was about the failures of a system that allowed him to vanish. The DNA discovery also exposed how misleading many of the old sightings had been. Over the decades, dozens of people claimed to have seen Lucan. Some seemed believable, like reports from Australia and South Africa. But one of the most famous cases turned out to be completely false. A man named Christopher Newman, living under the name Derek Crowther in Australia, was often mistaken for Lucan. He had aristocratic manners and even looked somewhat like the missing Earl. For years, locals and even newspapers believed he was the real Lucan hiding abroad, but investigations revealed he was nothing more than a con man and imposter. This created huge confusion, wasting time and adding layers of myth to an already complicated case. It showed just how fragile memory and eyewitness accounts can be, especially when the story is as sensational as this one. The imposters, rumors, and deliberate misdirection over the years had clouded the truth. Only modern forensic science was able to cut through the lies and confirm what really happened. Even with the DNA breakthrough, some questions remain unanswered. Did Lucan die quietly in another country, living under a false name? Did his aristocratic friends keep him safe until the very end? Or is there still more evidence waiting to be discovered? What is certain is that his story has become more than just a crime case. Lord Lucan is now a symbol of how wealth, privilege, and secrecy can bend the rules of justice. For Sandra Rivett's family, closure may never fully come. Her son Neil